everybody. Welcome once again to the Road to the Procure Tech Cup. Really happy to have you here on this Friday, January 30th. And we've got quite the show lined up for you today. This is all about making sure that you understand, as a procurement professional, the art of the possible with procurement technology. And we're going to be tackling a really important topic today: how to improve your supplier data quality using supplier relationship management tools, or SRM tools. And you'll notice I've got a little new feature activated here with the comments. So if you tell us where you're from in the chat on LinkedIn, or you pose a question to us during the show, we'll see it come up. And if it gets too bothersome, we'll take it off. But my guest and I today made sure that or we're game to try this little new feature here. So we'll do that today really quickly. And just before we get into the content here, want to remind you that we're on the journey, on the road to the Procure Tech Cup, which is going to be happening on April 22nd, 24th with a 100% virtual conference. And we're really excited about that. I'll give you details in a second. But as you can see, we've got a really fun, packed season for you on how to be successful with Procure Tech around deployment strategies, change in governance, how to build a business case, what you need to think about from an architecture standpoint. So go to the YouTube channel to watch the replays if you want to see anything in purple, and for everything in gray, it's about tuning into the show every Friday at noon as you do. So I see Michelle joining from Atlanta. Thanks, Michelle, for letting us know where you're watching from today. As I just mentioned, Procure Tech Unpacked. So this is going to be, last year we had the Procure Tech Cup only on LinkedIn, right, in text format, and now we're shifting it to a virtual event. So if you're a procurement professional who wants to know how to navigate Procure Tech, what are the different solution categories, how should I be thinking about this, this event was designed specifically for you. So we're gonna have, I have two objectives: for you to have a new industry best friend at the end of the week, and for you to learn how to navigate the Procure Tech space for your business in your context. So if you'd like a ticket to that, let me just actually take this off for a second here. Scan this QR code, fill out the survey, and I will be in touch with you to offer some tickets if you'd like to participate, and if there are still tickets left. They're slowly going off the shelves here, so it's going to be a fun time. All right, that's the housekeeping. Today's agenda: what is a supplier relationship management solution? So we'll just make sure to level set before we get into the discussion, and then we'll speak with my guest today, which I'll introduce shortly, about how to improve your supplier data quality with these types of solutions, right? So why do we need high quality data for suppliers? I think you'll probably have a couple opinions on that, but we'll go into detail. Why SRM and tooling is essential for getting it, and then how do leading organizations deal with the problem, right? How do we architecture, how do we put things in place to get what we want? We've got Chantal joining from Montreal as well. Thanks for tuning in. And let's actually, before we get into this, let's get my guest here. So we've got Gary Storr from Trust Your Supplier, Chief Sales and Marketing Officer. Thanks so much for being with me, Gary, this week.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. It's great to be here on a Friday at noontime, and looking forward to the discussion today. Excited.
Yeah. So we'll close out the month of January, which I'm sure can't end fast enough for a lot of people.
With the snow in our forecast, we can't get it out of here fast enough.
That's right. All right. So just before we hop into our discussion here, right, just want to make sure to level set with everybody. What's an SRM solution? I bring this map up every week, right? We've got our pure procurement processes, no pun intended, at the top here, where we've got spend analysis, category management, sourcing, contract management, operational purchasing, or P2P and accounts payable. We've got this new layer, intake management and process orchestration, that has shown up in the last couple of years as a foundation to help you navigate through a fragmented landscape. And then SRM at the bottom here is what we're talking about today, right? So it's really the supplier lifecycle management, whether it be the data, the relationship, the risk, and or the performance. And so for me, SRM solutions is really, how do we bring all of that together in parallel to our procurement process and our transactions, our purchase orders, et cetera, to get that holistic picture of the supplier and getting the data that we need based on what type of relationship we have with them, right? So that's kind of how I define it. I don't know, Gary, would you add anything or nuance anything I said?
No, well, I think you're bang on, Joe. I guess one point I would mention is that this is a constantly changing landscape, and we're going to talk a lot about data today. And I think the reason that we're seeing a high degree of evolution here, and in many areas in the tech sector, but specifically as we're going to discuss today, the underlying data that's the driver for most of what happens in the relationship between the supplier and the customer organization is the nature of the data. What data is important, what data is relevant, and what data is being used by the organization to evaluate the relationship with the supplier. We're going to get into all of that, but that data is constantly, not just the data itself is changing, but the way that the industry, the way the market, and the way that organizations utilize that data they're shifting sands. And I think it's really important to have that adaptability mindset in and around supplier relationship management as you start to look at your relationships with suppliers.
Yeah, and I think that's a great lead into just a one pager here. Like if you want to learn more about Trust Your Supplier, we went into a bit more detail on what you guys are all about during the first episode earlier in the season. But I think what you just said, Gary, leads great into this one pager, and I'd love for you to give the audience just a quick taste of what Trust Your Supplier is about, and obviously it ties into that that need for data, right?
Sure. Well, Trust Your Supplier. Obviously, we work in the supplier relationship management space, and we solve problems for both the supply side and the buy side, in terms of bringing information from the supplier and from third parties that have perspectives on the supplier, typically from a data perspective, and we'll talk about that here in detail in a second, to the buying organization, so that relationship between the buyer and supplier can be productive, can be effective, and it can solve problems on both sides of the ledger. What Trust Your Supplier does principally is reduces a lot of the administrative burden on suppliers by putting their data on a network that can be shared. So it's a little bit like LinkedIn in that respect. And so that's a bit unique in the industry because it's an open network. And then on the buy side, organizations can look at a supplier's information in real time. If the supplier already exists on our Trust Your Supplier network, they see information immediately. There's no lag time in trying to email and coerce the supplier to provide their information. It's already there. And then, we all of these third parties that you see here and more are integrated into our Trust Your Supplier platform. So all of the data that are provided by the Moody's and the Dun & Bradstreets and the EcoVadis of the world are resident on our platform and provide the ratings and commentary and other specifics about supplier to help organizations evaluate that relationship, both in terms of onboarding, screening, and then during that life cycle of the relationship. So that's really a little bit about TYS.
Yeah, and I love that you highlighted like an open network, right? Because one of the things that I'm always like, you got to onboard to all these solutions as a vendor, as customers are asking me to come on to their solution. And so like it's about, when we think about blockchains and being able to have a profile or have a golden record, not just me of my supplier, but for suppliers to share with customers. Like I think that's eventually where we need to go, right? Of being able to say, like, regardless of what tool you're using or platform you're using, like if a supplier can go on a tool like Trust Your Supplier, set up their profile, and then open it up to others through an open connection, right, through an API, like it also saves them time and has a value proposition for them, right? So
yeah, absolutely. I hate doing things twice, Joel, right?
Yeah.
And so if I could do something once and share it, great. And so that's really what we built the solution on.
Cool. Very cool. And so, with that backdrop, right, well, you guys are experts at that, right? Let's dive into our discussion here around how to improve supplier data quality with these SRM solutions. And I'd love to let you kick it off.
Yeah, sure. So we're topic today is data, and data, in my view, and I think that most in the industry would agree, is really the most important element to maintaining a relationship and managing your suppliers. Because without the data, you really don't understand. That's what a supplier. To most organizations, the data is the construct that defines what the supplier really is, right? And so when a lot of data initiatives start, right, and they start because data is it's stale, it's old, it's duplicated, and so there's all these data initiatives and organizations they fail at this because they start with what do we have. It's not really what do they have, but why do you want it, right? Like everybody says, hey, we need better data, we need cleaner records, we need a single source of truth. Of course we need that, right? But what are you trying to use the data for? What decisions are you trying to make? What are the risks you're trying to manage? And what are the risks you're trying to avoid, right? And most importantly, like any problem that you have in your life, what outcomes are you trying to, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve, or what are you trying to improve, right? So think about the outcome first. Why do you need the data? What is it going to perform for you? When you get the end result of the data, what is the data set going to tell you about the supplier, about the market, about the industry, about risk, about regulatory concerns, or whatever it might be? Those are the important factors that need to be put forward first, and then that everything else is going to fall in line behind that.
Yeah, whether it's the business case, which we've touched on another show on, right, and or the deployment plan after that, right? Because as I'm sure we'll allude to, like you can't do everything at the same time, right? And so starting with what are those questions, those why questions that are going to move the needle is yeah, it's fundamental, and it seems it seems fundamental. It's fundamental. It seems like easy, but we often forget to do it, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And what that drives, I've got noise on here, and noise is a big driver in a lot of businesses, in a lot of realms, right? There's a lot, obviously, and it seems to me the larger the organization, the more noise there is. And we have to eliminate that noise. And when I say noise, what I'm talking about is what is clouding the definitive nature of why you need the data. In this case, what do you need the supplier data for, right? You probably need them to evaluate your suppliers before you bring them on board, before you sign the contract. You want to evaluate them. Is this somebody I want to be doing business with? Are they going to represent my organization? Are they going to be regular? Are they going to align to regulatory concerns? Are they going to meet my corporate objectives? And most importantly, are they going to keep me out of an orange jumpsuit, right? Like I don't want to be exposed based on the supplier, right? And then I want to be able to manage that risk that I take a snapshot with on day one, every other day of that relationship, because we know that no 2 days in supply chain are alike and things are going to change. And so I need to understand how the risk is changing. The market risk is changing, regulatory landscape has changed, the supplier has changed. We as an organization have changed in terms of maybe what our policies and objectives are. I need to understand what that is. The only thing that's going to tell me that is quality data, right? And that's why I need it, right? And this supports all your functions, whether it be finance, your compliance team, your ESG team, your InfoSec team. All these organizations need that data to make those kind of decisions. And having that and having quality data, trusted data that you have confidence in upfront and that's reliable and reputable is going to reduce all that friction you experience and take out a lot of the cycle time and all the nonsense that you're dealing with when you're onboarding, and then when you have to ask those reactive questions when something pops up inevitably down the road.
And I feel like these whys, they're generally applicable, right? Most organizations will, at one point or another, resonate with one of these whys. Do you think, what do you think? Like, and you alluded to it in your answer or in what you were saying as well, in terms of having many stakeholders involved in that supplier data landscape, right? Finance, compliance, ESG, risk, IT, etc. Do you find, like, in your client portfolio, people you're dealing with, like, there's these little fiefdoms, and the biggest challenge is not necessarily defining the why, but the fact that everybody has a different why, and it's difficult to prioritize them? Like, what advice do you have for folks in terms of navigating that complexity of having, everybody and nobody owns the vendor data at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, well, one thing is if you see a gap, step up and take it, right? Because nobody else is going to do it, right? So if there is a gap, if there is data ownership, let's say, that nobody in your organization really wants to own, that's an opportunity for you to step in and make things right. The second thing I would say is it's probably not achievable to have alignment across the organizations, unilaterally, right? So, and it's okay. It's okay if finance has a different way of looking at things than IT does. Okay, they may not be looking at the same data elements, maybe not using the same criteria. That's okay. It's hard to get alignment, and so don't try to achieve something that's going to be so daunting, and then it doesn't produce a lot of value. One of the reasons that supply relationship management systems are so effective and so needed for organizations is the good ones allow these specific organizations to look at the data and look at the supplier in this case in kind of myopically in the way they want to look at it. So finance can look at a supplier differently than maybe the ESG team or the compliance team or the InfoSec team. That's okay, right? Like, we all, when we watch a movie, you all see different things, right? And so that's okay. Like it's okay to look for different elements and to use different data sources or data elements to drive evaluations. It doesn't have to be common.
I like that. And it sort of alludes to like the best way to deploy it, which we've covered in detail on another show, but you don't need to align everybody at the start, right? You could start just with like your minimum viable project, minimum viable data sources for it to be useful and for it to make a business case materialize. But then with this larger overarching vision of being able to onboard different stakeholders and have them sit in different areas of the theater to see the movie how they want to see it, as you say, right? So that's great.
Yeah. We actually have small companies that we do business with that are growing, and all they have is email and spreadsheets today. So I always say to them, because I always want to boil the ocean, say, start with one, right? Start with financial health or start with info. Start with something. Doesn't matter what it is. You'll mature, you'll grow, you'll figure it out. Start somewhere. You don't have to boil the ocean.
And we sort of see these dimensions that you're speaking to on screen, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so if you think about a supplier, right, you have different motions when you're evaluating a supplier, say during a sourcing or during a pre-screening event, than you do during the relationship in which you're managing them on a day-to-day basis, right? So that same supplier, you got to have these different data needs. I got that in red and the right side of the slide. And this is super important, right? Supplier data is going to mature, it's going to change. And part of the way it's going to do that is your perspective. Your perspective changes throughout the life cycle of the relationship. Maybe the supplier is only providing you, one small component of your business, but you develop trust with them, and then they grow and they take on more projects, or they're delivering more products or raw materials or whatever services, whatever it is they do, and they become more strategic to you. Well, you're going to look at them with a way different lens because they became way more important to you, right? So that's really important to understand as it relates to data. You have to make sure that you're using the data adaptively. Easy for me to say, when as you change the relationship with the supplier and as the supplier migrates through that life cycle.
Yeah, and to your point, right? I always visualize like a funnel where at the beginning, if I'm going out to market, right, I want to have summary information on a lot of suppliers. But then as I go down that funnel and bring them further into the life cycle, I want deeper information about fewer suppliers, right? And so I have to be able to gather those different levels of information depending on where they are in that life cycle, whether they've been, we want to qualify them for a specific type of service or specific commodity. And so I think it paints that picture. You're painting that picture with your words in any case.
Right, 100%. It's okay. So you look at criteria. We're going to talk about here, right? And so you just need the right data at the right time. Right. And the analogy I'll use here is, it's kind of like your kids, right? When your kids are really small, right? They're preschool kids. You use a different set of criteria to evaluate how they're progressing, right? Then they get into grade school. You start to look at the report cards. You start to see how they're performing, how they're all of their social aspects. And then as they get into teens, there's a whole different set of attributes there, right? So it's not unlike what we're doing here, right? Like we're looking at the data and we need different data pieces at different points in time based on the maturity of relationship and how they're progressing, right? So you want to know, hey, can I pay this supplier safely, right? Like fraud is exploding. Like it seems like every day I read the news or somebody else getting hacked or there's some fraud, right? Especially in the public sector, it's amazing, right? How compliant we are, like regulatory. I saw a stat that um, uh, regulatory frameworks have grown like 1,200% in the last 10 years. It's amazing, right? Like, especially in Europe, I think that
Yeah.
that's growing more than anywhere else, right? And then what else has changed? What else has changed that increases our risk that's going to make us look at the supplier based on those characteristics? And what data do I need to look at? And do I have that data? And if I don't have it, how do I go get it? And is it reputable, right? So all of those things are really important as you drive decisions.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, right? You don't, because often when we think about supplier onboarding, we think about our own questions, the own data that we want to go get. But it's to the first slide that you showed around Trust Your Supplier, is like, is there a data source out there that we can leverage, that we can plug and play into our process to help us answer this question without us having to manually gather all of that data. I would also invite, like, as we're getting into the crunchier content here in the back end, like if folks have questions for Gary or I as we're going through the topic, make sure to drop them in the chat, and I'll make sure we answer them for you here as we're going.
Sure. Yeah. So trust to our application first begins with trust. Trust your supplier, right? So trust is really important to us, and I think that when we talk about data, if you don't trust the data, if the data is not reputable, then it's just information, right? You have to have something that you can look at and you can hang your hat on, right? And you know that the actions you take on that data are those actions are going to be backed up by the data elements that you're looking at and what the analytics around that data tell you. If you don't have that, then you can't take the necessary actions, and you can't rely on that those decisions are the right decisions, right? So having reputable, trusted data that you have confidence in is extremely important. Whether it's data internal that you're curating, or just you're curating from the supplier, or information that you're getting externally, from third parties like a Moody's or a D&B or an Ecovados or whoever it might be. All of that data needs to be trusted.
And I'm wondering, because I see your first line, right? The challenge is not connection, it's trust. And I'm hearing you on the data sources, right? But so from your vantage point, right, with the number of your client portfolio, has collection become table stakes? Like, because I know for some organizations without tools, like collection is still an issue to some extent because it's so manual. But from a tech standpoint, like, that's become table stakes. It's more about the trust of where that data comes from, and if you have two pieces of data that are different for the same attribute, like being able to determine which one takes the cake, so to speak.
Yeah, collecting really more important. This probably should say collecting trusted data, right? Because anybody can go on Google or ChatGPT and collect information about a supplier in 10 seconds today. That's not hard, right? What's hard is, hey, is the data I'm getting complete? Is it accurate? Is it current? And most importantly, can I trust it, right? And that's the challenge, right? So it's collecting trusted data. How do I get my hands on data I can trust? Most important factor.
Yeah, and other than first party internal data, right? And that's the big one.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other piece of this is that we have to understand that data degrades over time. So you want a movie, not a snapshot. And I got the little graphic in here, right? But you want to be able to look at the motion picture of the data. What does it look? It looked like this on Monday. It looked like that on Friday, right? That's really important. If I take a snapshot of a supplier on the day that I onboard them and I never look at that supplier again, what was the point of doing the evaluation in the first place, right? Because we know suppliers change all kind of information. They change their bank accounts. They get sold. They get bought, right? Their certifications expire. Did they renew them? I don't know. How do you know that, right? Regulations change. 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we didn't have GDPR. We got it now. Are they compliant, right? Risk profiles shift based on a whole range of factors that we could spend hours talking about, right? And so what we're finding is a lot of our customers and a lot of people in the industry, they don't do recertification, right? So they don't. This is not once a year or once in a lifetime. you have to have recertification to go back and look at the supplier, especially the ones that represent the most risk, and say, hey, we took the snapshot here, whether it's 3 months ago, 6 months ago, let's take it again. Let's see what's changed. And that's where tools like Trust Your Supplier come into play, because they can do this for you in a very automated manner. And they can just flag change to you, so you can look at it reactively and passively, and you don't have to go out and mine all that information on a day-to-day basis. And that's really the power of a tool like an SRM tool like TYS.
Yeah, yeah, man. And I'll bring a question in from the chat here from Uday, who's, he asked the AI question, right? So I'll ask it again, right? But I think these are all things that can be done without much AI. It's more automation. And if you're collecting like the certifications, the insurance at the beginning of the life cycle, and you have those expiration dates, then you're able to automatically re-kick off and get the data either from a trusted source or from the supplier directly, right? But how do you see artificial intelligence coming in and either making this process easier, or what kind of things are you experimenting with at Trust Your Supplier, or are you seeing more widely in the industry?
It goes back to the same thing, data, right? So AI is only as good as the data it's going to access, right? So if you have good quality, trusted data you have confidence in, that the LLM or the AI engine is utilizing, great. It's going to help you significantly, right? Because it's going to introduce efficiency and provide insights that maybe you wouldn't get organically. But if the data can't be trusted, what good is it, right? Because then you're just going to question how the AI interprets the data. Yeah. So I think it's really the same thing, right? It starts with data.
Yeah, and to your point, right, it might be easier to answer ad hoc questions by querying that data with a LLM type tool, and or facilitating the data collection on the supplier side by having it be conversational instead of filling out a form. But right. Ultimately, the result that you want is the same, right? Is having that high quality vendor profile that isn't just what you need in your ERP, but spans much wider than that, with the requirements that you accumulate over time from finance, from ESG, for pre-contract, post-contract, risk monitoring, et cetera, right? And piecemealing it, eating it bite by bite is the best way to eat an elephant, right? Cool. And I love the picture versus movie, because so many organizations I've worked with, like, they take a picture at the start of the relationship and then that's it, right? So if you can, when you're taking that picture, you can put the timestamps next to it. It tells you when to take that next picture, depending on.
You have to keep taking pictures, otherwise, otherwise you have no idea what's going on. So, you can see here. I won't read this to everyone, but there's examples of what happened. These are examples of what happens when you don't have quality data, right? You lose time. You're exposed to fraud. There's a lot of inefficiency and errors. There's just no visibility to risk. These are things that are real, right? Like, these are business impacting issues. When you start throwing around words like fraud and regulatory concerns, that's big stuff, right? And we can't ignore it. We can't, it's almost like life insurance, right? Like, you can't just put it on the back burner forever. At some point, you have to go get the data that you need to do a fair evaluation and make sure that data is accurate, right? You have to, when you're sending the supplier a check or a payment, you can tell how old I am. I'm still using the word check, but if you send them a payment, you got to make sure you send it to the right guy, right? Like, the right organization. Otherwise, you're exposed and they're exposed, right? And it's not good for the relationship.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've seen, I think it was in our first show, right, when we did business cases for SRM, where each of these line items you can put a dollar value to, right? Like, there's a potential impact that has a value, and then there's a likelihood of that happening. And maybe it has happened and it's happening multiple times a year, right? So there is a way to build a business case on this. And I know it's harder than a traditional like savings business case, right, which we're used to in procurement. But if you take the time to go down the list, right, and assign values to it, then there is, a real monetary business case to make for these types of potential downsides or catastrophic events, so to speak, right? Yeah, and I know we're coming at time here, so I'll let us wrap up. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, no, and we'll move quickly here, but I've been harping on this the whole time, right? It's about confidence, about trust, it's about having that quality data, right? And that gets you to cycle time improvements, paying people safely, being you don't have to stay up at night waiting for an audit to pass, right? And you're managing your risk, right? So this all goes into having trusted data that introduces less friction to your organization and ultimately gives you a higher quality relationship with your suppliers.
And furthermore, to add to what you're saying, like everything else hangs on top of that, right? So if you have transactional systems, if you have sourcing systems, spend analysis systems, like if you've
100%.
got that high quality vendor data, everything else is hung off of that. Contracts, POs, invoices, performance management, the hierarchies of your ordering addresses, etc. So it's kind of like a foundational piece in my mind.
Yes, absolutely. And if you think about it, really mature organizations, this becomes hygiene, right? As I mentioned, they start with outcomes. They look at data as a life cycle asset that's extremely important to do, right? They automate as much as they can automate around validation, so you're not chasing, you're being proactive, right? You have some kind of governance around the process, right? You're not just putting policies in a vault somewhere. You're monitoring change, and you're using reputable sources to do that. These are all really mature activities that organizations do that help them with their supplier management.
And contrary to having to go to the gym or brushing your teeth, you can automate this stuff, right? You can put your hygiene on.
You can automate it. Yeah, that's true, right? You can. You can't do that with brushing your teeth, but you can do it with supplier data, right? So most of it, most of all, be clear why you need. The why is very important. Start with the outcome. What am I doing this for? Why? What's the outcome look like, right? Process drives the quality. You're not going to get that. You can't buy data quality. You have to have a process about why you're doing it and how you're doing it, right? Trust, I've hit 100 times here, so I think you get the point there. And trust starts with having something reputable from in terms of a data source. So, all of these things as you embark on any kind of data journey, keep these things in mind as you go forward.
And it's and I know we discussed it during the show, but yes, having that big all-encompassing vision with all the functions, but finding that minimum viable scope so that you're able to deploy something that works and then iterate on it and add to it over time. Yes, instead of trying to do everything at once with 20 different functions and stakeholders is probably the best way to get through this, because you're going to get through these 4 steps over and over again and get to that higher maturity level.
Yeah, find something that nobody wants, take ownership of it, improve it, set and create a model within your organization that people can replicate, and you'll be a hero, right? And everybody wants to be a hero, right? So
that's true. That's true. And not all heroes wear capes. Some of them wear SRM systems. So if you want to get in touch, thanks for watching the show. First of all, for tuning in today. If you want to get in touch with Trust Your Supplier, I think Gary, you guys have a library of use cases, and you can
sure do. Yeah, a lot of stuff out there. If you want to scan that QR code, a lot of stuff, whether it be a video, whether you want to look at some of the interactive capabilities that we have out there that can give you a little bit of an idea about what TYS is all about. Or you could just reach out to me, and I'll be glad to sit down with you and answer any questions you have.
Beautiful, beautiful. And then for everybody watching the show, if you want to tune in to further episodes or get the link towards the YouTube channel, you can tune into the Peer Procurement newsletter. It comes out every Sunday night these days, and we share much more than just the show, but also best practices on procure tech in general, covering the new Magic Quadrant from Gartner this weekend. So make sure to tune into that edition. And thank you for the questions. People tuning in from Toronto, Paris, UK, Norway, Sao Paulo, and Brazil. So thanks so much for everybody to globally who is tuned in. And we'll see you again next week. We're also talking about SRM next week. So if it's a topic that's of interest, make sure you tune in. And Gary, a big thank you once again for coming on the show today. We'll see you soon.
Sure. You too, Joel. Thanks again. And thanks for everyone for participating. I had a ball.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
I guess.